The South American nation of Venezuela was once an oil-rich country with one of the highest per capita incomes in the world. Since the discovery of oil in the country in 1920s, Venezuela has seen rampant corruption, hyperinflation, and decades of poor governance, which led to the downfall of the country. The Royal Dutch Shell geologists struck oil in the La Rosa field in Venezuela in 1922. The initial production was 100,000 barrels per day. Soon, more than 100 companies flocked to Venezuela, backed by dictator General Juan Vicente Gómez. But too much focus on oil production, which accounted for 90% of country's exports, soon led to ballooning of Venezuela's currency, Bolivar. The South American country enacted the hydrocarbons law in 1940s and asked the oil companies to give half of their profits to the state. Within 5 years, the government's income increased sixfold. The first elections were held in Venezuela in 1958, and it became one of the founding members of the OPEC in 1960. But income from oil remained concentrated in the state, thereby giving rise to massive corruption. News reports claim more than $100 billion was embezzled between 1972 and 1997. The glut of 1980s severely affected Venezuela's economy and inflation soared. Falling oil prices strained the country's finances, which were already burdened by the massive foreign debt accrued by purchasing foreign refineries. The national sentiment paved way for Hugo Chavez, a military officer, to rise to prominence, first through a failed military coup and then through his socialist platform in the 90s. After becoming the president in 1998, Chavez brought in a series of reforms in Venezuela, which resulted in reduction of poverty by 20%. He systematically reduced the production of oil, fired thousands of workers from state-owned Petróleos de Venezuela (SA, PDVSA), and subsidized oil to several countries in the region, including Cuba. But during his presidency, which continued till 2013, Chavez also took measures which once again brought in the fears of authoritarianism. He ended term limits, took control of the Supreme Court, and nationalized businesses. Chavez died from cancer in March 2013 at the age of 58 after a 14-year rule. His preferred successor, Vice President Nicolas Maduro, took office days later. In April that year, Maduro narrowly defeated opposition candidate Enrique Capriles in the presidential election. Capriles and allies say the vote was marred by fraud and call on supporters to take to the streets. In February 2014, Venezuelan security forces arrested well-known opposition leader Leopoldo López on charges of fomenting unrest after a wave of protests known as the Exit, seeking to oust Maduro. The step was seen as Maduro trying to establish a dictatorship on the measures implemented by Chavez. In March 2016, Venezuela's Supreme Court, which has consistently sided with the ruling Socialist Party, announced it is taking over the functions of the National Assembly, the country's legislative body. The court quickly walked back the decision amid international outcry. But the event sparked months of anti-government protests that ultimately left more than 100 dead. In July 2017, Venezuela called a referendum, boycotted by the opposition, to approve the creation of an all-powerful legislative body called the Constituent Assembly. It was nominally tasked with rewriting the constitution, but quickly took over crucial legislative functions, leading to accusations that Maduro is undermining democracy. Maduro cruised to re-election over a lesser-known opposition candidate in 2018 amid low turnout and allegations of vote buying by the government. The domestic opposition, United States, and Lima group of mostly right-leaning Latin American governments said they do not recognize the results. Maduro went ahead with his inauguration of a second 6-year term, ignoring the advices of several Latin American governments. Juan Guaido, a virtually unknown opposition lawmaker who assumed leadership of the largely toothless National Assembly days earlier, called Maduro a usurper. In January this year, Guaido himself took oath as interim president at the opposition's largest rally since 2017. He was almost instantly recognized as the country's legitimate president by the United States and many of Venezuela's neighbors. But that hasn't affected Maduro at all. The political battle has intensified in the country since January, with the ruling Constituent Assembly stripping Guaido's immunity and authorizing Venezuela's High Court to criminally prosecute him for usurpation of functions. Parallel to the political battle, the country has been hit by a series of devastating blackouts that have left millions without water, prompting the government to replace the country's energy minister and institute power rationing in a bid to address the outages. 3 major blackouts hit Venezuela in March, worsening already dire living and economic conditions in the country and prompting authorities to take steps aimed at curbing the outages.